Good day everyone, I am the last presenter of the final period and here are my topics. Illustrative example 2, migrant workers in continental European cities. So, here are the first slide. During the past 40 years, an important new dimension has been added to the social geography of continental European cities with the arrival of tens of thousands of migrant workers. Most of them from the poorer regions of the Mediterranean. So although estimates vary a good deal, there were in the late 2000s some 22 million aliens living in European countries. About half of these were young adult males who had immigrated in order to seek work, originally at least on a temporary basis. The rest were wives and families who had joined them. So, in other words, more than 40 years have passed since Europe opened up for people living in the poorest part of the Mediterranean country. So, more than 10,000 workers from them were given an opportunity to work in European cities. But if you consider that in recent years, more than 22 million people have migrated to Europe. But the main reason for them is to find a job. And some of them have already included their families or they have already formed their families. If you think about it, European countries are very rich, which is why there are many migrant workers there. We Filipinos also cannot deny that when we say Europe, we immediately think of first-class countries. And most of us also dream of getting to this country, especially the famous places So especially, maybe if that job is looking for us to get there. So, let's proceed to the next slides. At the heart of this influx of foreign-born workers were the labor needs of the more developed regions, coupled with the demographic echo effect of low birth rates in the 1930s and 1940s, a sluggish rate of growth in the indigenous labor force. As the demand for labor in more developed countries expanded in the 1960s, so indigenous workers found themselves able to shun low-wage, unpleasant, and menial occupations. Immigrant labor filled the vacuum. At the same time, the more prosperous countries perceived that foreign workers might provide a buffer for the indigenous labor force against the effects of economic cycle, the so-called conjuncture philosophy. So, conjuncture, which stands for buffer in economic cycle. It means that there are situations in Europe where indigenous people are not given opportunities due to the growth of immigrants in the area. In this case, developed countries such as European countries focus on skilled workers coming from other places or countries. And because of this, there is what we call the conjuncture. This is the opposite of our situation in the Philippines, where we do not focus on skilled workers outside our country. But also, because of the lack of jobs, we give more opportunities to the people in our country. If there is a foreign company that opens jobs here, the majority of the workers here should be Filipino. So, we know that our country is a third world country. So, it is more important for us to provide jobs to Filipinos here. So, it is more important to provide jobs for the Filipino than skilled workers from outside of the country. So, next, let's proceed to the next slides. The peak of these streams of immigrants occurred in the mid-1960s and early 1970s. The onset of deep economic recession in 1973, however, brought a dramatic check to the flows. Restriction on the admission of non-European community immigrants began in West Germany in November 1973. And within 12 months, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands had followed with new restrictions. By this time, there were nearly 2 million foreign workers in West Germany, over 1.5 million in France, half a million in Switzerland, and around a quarter of a million Belgium and Sweden. So, and because of the current economic buffer in Europe, they have restricted the admission of non-European migrants to solve one of the problems in this issue of Europe. Many countries have already restricted immigrants to bring back and give opportunity to the people who have not been given opportunity within their country, and that is the indigenous people here. So, and one of the reasons is the booming population of immigrant workers living in Europe. Next. Next. Since nearly all of the immigrants were initially recruited to low-skill, low-wage occupation, they have inevitably been channeled towards the cheapest housing and the most rundown neighborhoods. So the position of immigrants in the labor market is, of course, partly self-inflicted. For many, the objective has been to earn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, the easiest strategy being to take on employment with an hourly wage, where overtime and even a second job can be pursued. Most immigrants, however, tend to be kept at the foot of economic ladder by a combination of institutional and social discrimination. So there are immigrants who have moved or settled in the cheapest housing places. So low-skilled and low-wage jobs are taken advantage of to follow the hourly wage system. This is a strategy to make working time worthwhile. And because of this, workers are forced to work overtime. Or it is depend on the people who wants to gain more salary, so they pursue to do an overtime. Next. So in terms of partial outcomes, a fairly consistent pattern has emerged despite the very different minority populations involved in different cities. Serbs, Croats, and Turks in Duisburg, Frankfurt, Cologne, and Vienna, Algerians, Italians, and Tunisians in Paris, and Surinamese and Turks in the Rotterdam. For example, in short, just as the migrants are placing the lower echelons of the indigenous population in the labor market, so they are acting as a partial replacement for the rapidly declining indigenous population in the older neighborhoods or privately rented housing near to sources of service employment and factory jobs. Quite simply, the overriding priority for migrant workers is to live close to their jobs in cheap accommodation. This applies to all national groups, so that similar special patterns have persisted even as in Hamburg's case. The culturally more alien Turkish, Greek, and Portuguese populations replace older and more familiar groups such as Italians and Spaniards. So what is happening is that as the number of immigrant workers in Europe increases, the indigenous population in the area of job decreases. They replace indigenous workers in the immigrant workers, and they keep immigrants close to their jobs. It affects some indigenous who lose their job and causes discrimination in society. Next. A new twist to the story of ethnic minority groups in Europe has been provided by the massive economic changes sweeping the continent following the end of the long boom, and the advent of globalization, the industrialization, high levels of long-term unemployment, and increasing social polarization. At the same time, the social welfare policies of EU states have been curtailed as the attempt to cut budget deficits. As a result, social polarization has begun to affect the charter group as well as ethnic minorities, leading to heightened social tensions in many cases. Unemployment of ethnic groups is becoming a problem in European countries. And as a result, there is a division of opinion and belief when it comes to economic matters. It becomes a major problem in society which drives the formation of tension between the majority and the minority group of people. Next. The promotion of greater social and economic cohesion was one of the key objectives of the 1991 Maastricht Treaty that paved to the way for greater integration of the EU states. However, this treaty created two classes of immigrants within Europe. First, there are the European residents living in the boundaries of other European nations with the right to movement within the European Union. And the second, there are the 10 million non-European immigrants from outside the European Union who, although long settled, do not have full citizenship or the right to move to other EU member states. The aim of this division is to create a fortress Europe policy and inhibit immigration, including that from refugees and asylum seekers outside the European Union. So the two types of immigrants are the non-European and the other people that live in European boundaries. They have different situations and type of acceptance and opportunities. Maybe it's because of the prevention of illegal immigrants entering Europe. This is the part of the objectives of building of what they call the European fortress. And that's all for my report. And thank you for listening.